Our first scripture reading is from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 20. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and holding fast to him. For that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So our second reading this morning is going to be Matthew chapter 25, which we also read last week. But some of you weren't here, so this is really good. You get to make sure you get like the full story. What we're going to do is read it kind of together throughout the sermon as we talk about what these parables mean, three parables. But why are we talking about Matthew 25? You might be wondering. Maybe you read the insert in your bulletin about Matthew 25. I don't know. The Presbyterian Church USA has a new initiative. They're asking us to join to become a Matthew 25 church. Our presbytery decided in December to become a Matthew 25 presbytery. And so we thought maybe a good thing to do would be to look at Matthew 25. Yeah? Your officers, your elders and deacons voted that they thought it would be a good idea for us to join this initiative, but they wanted to make sure that everybody was on board. So that's what we are doing today. So Matthew 25 has three parables. There's the parable about the 10 bridesmaids, the parable of the talents, and the parable of the sheep and the goats. That's the one that says, whatever you did for the least of these, you also did for me. So we have varying levels of familiarity with these parables, right? You've heard some of them before a lot, some maybe not so much. These parables all come in response to what happens in Matthew 24. Jesus tells the disciples that one day the temple is going to be destroyed, that not a stone will be left upon a stone, that everything about life the way they know it will be gone. And they, of course, want to know, when is this going to happen, right? Can you tell us? How are we going to know? We want to be prepared, right? And Jesus goes on to say in Matthew 24, no one knows the hour or the day, but the disciples, they want to understand how they're going to know what happens. Last week we talked about it in terms of a pop quiz. Jesus, can you tell us when the pop quiz is coming? We want to be ready. So in response to that, Jesus tells them these three stories. The Bridesmaids on its face is a story about always being ready for the end of the world, for whatever judgment or party that might entail, with the implication and really the threat that if you aren't ready, when God shows up, you could get locked out forever. Cool. In the parable of the talents, you'll be punished not only if you haven't, if you're not ready, not only if you haven't done bad, but if you have neglected to do good. And then in the sheep and the goats, we find out Jesus has been hiding, ready to test us, secretly, in all these opportunities that we have certainly, probably, most definitely missed. So at the end of all this, I have to say, I don't love it, right? These traditional ways that we've been taught to think about these three stories do not inspire me. If they inspire me with anything, it's with fear, with terror. I was talking with Ari about this. She came to my office 2 Tuesdays ago, and I was like, I don't know how to talk about this. I don't like it. And she said, that's so interesting. If it really bugs you that much, there's probably something more there. Yes, and there is. So last week we talked about the fact that these are parables. They are not allegories. right? So what's an allegory? An allegory is a story with a one-to-one correspondence, right? So the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Aslan the lion is God. That's just how it is. If you had to read George Orwell's Animal Farm when you were in high school, Napoleon the pig is Stalin. Like, this is the one-to-one correspondence that we want you to see. Parables are not doing that. They are stories. They're meant to evoke emotion. They're meant to spark our imagination. They're meant to trouble or disturb the things that we would assume. And it is so important to resist allegorical interpretations of them. So when we read these stories, we're so tempted to think, oh, the powerful person is God, and the not powerful person must be me, right? But that's not what this is. And I think if we resist reading them in this way, there's a lot more for us to learn. So last week we read them again, and we started to understand them a little bit differently. In the parable of the bridesmaids, we wondered if the main turning point of the story was not that the wise bridesmaids had brought extra oil and the foolish ones hadn't, but that maybe the main point was that the bridegroom was late. That Jesus was teaching the disciples something about waiting. That in the parable of the talents, if we can just stop ourselves from imagining that God is the slave master, which is so problematic and so if we can just not do that, it becomes a story about fear. About the ways that fear causes us to waste opportunities. And so maybe instead of your quiz will also cover the ways in which you not only did the wrong thing, but also failed to do the good thing. Maybe what Jesus is trying to get across to the disciples is that while they are waiting for ultimate justice, for everything to be set right, they might feel afraid. But that fear is only going to lead to loss and to pain and maybe the gnashing of teeth. In the parable of the sheep and goats, we acknowledge that, we are not real idiots here. We want to be the sheep. We get it. But the thing that happens in the parable is that the sheep don't know that they have done good. Both groups are surprised. The sheep have just been living their lives, have been so connected to God, to the source of their life and their love, that their actions have overflowed out of that to bring healing to the people around them. They have been compassionate because they have encountered God's compassion. And they just did what came naturally to them. So instead of shaming the disciples for the pop quizzes that they failed when they didn't help Jesus in disguise, Jesus maybe was trying to orient them toward what was really important in life. So we ended last week asking, are we living in anticipation of God's terminal pop quiz? Or are we preparing to wait, to live in Jesus' absence as we become God's light in the world? That's what's at stake in this passage, and honestly, that is what's at stake in the life of our congregation right now, right? It's in the covenant that we just signed, and our commitment to broaden our thinking about mission outside of our walls, about building community and accessibility. So with this lens, that these are stories to instruct us on how to live, let's return to them once again. Follow along in your pew if you would like. You can get your Pew Bible out, or if you've got a Bible app on your phone you want to pull out. I'm reading the NRSV, that's my favorite. I think the Pew Bible is the NIV. It might be a little different, that's fine. But we'll start in Matthew 25, verse 1. So then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. Now in the Pew Bible you've got virgins, right? This is a Greek word, parthenos, that means a young woman. We can talk at length about this and the history of translation, especially the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and how that has totally changed our expectations about Mary being a virgin. But this is just a word that means young women, okay? And in this context, it's also a word that could mean bridesmaids, or the young women who are attending a woman who is about to get married. And in the ancient world, you would have all of these wedding party people gathered at the bride's family's home and at the groom's family's home. The tradition was that the groom and his people would come to get the bride, and they would all go back to his parents' house in this fun, exciting procession. And it's night, it might get dark, so they've got their lamps or their torches ready to help them light the way on this procession. So 5 of them, of the bridesmaids, were foolish, and 5 were wise. Do you watch a lot of comedy movies or TV shows, you know, there's usually like the straight man and then like the kind of real goofy people that play off of each other. Are we watching Seinfeld in my house? So you have like Jerry Seinfeld, who's like there together, and then his crazy neighbor Kramer, right? Who like is all over the place. And this is a trope that we see a lot. So we've got the 5 wise bridesmaids, they're ready, and the 5 foolish ones. All right, what's coming next? When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks with oil for their lamp. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here's the bridegroom, come and meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." Ah, those foolish bridesmaids. They didn't bring the oil, now they don't have any. It could be a joke that Jesus is setting up, right? This is funny. And the wise replied, "No way. We can't have enough for you and for us. You'd better go to the dealers and get some. It's midnight, okay? So we got 5 bridesmaids at midnight going to find some oil for their lamps. This is ridiculous." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord." Now, Lord here is the Greek word kurios. It means like sir. It's an honorific title, right? You think of lords and ladies. That's how it's being used. They say, "Sir, sir, open the door to us." And he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So this joke gets set up, right? The foolish bridesmaids, we're just waiting for them to do something stupid. They forgot their oil. They didn't bring it. They weren't prepared. They're waiting around forever. Everybody falls asleep. That's really funny. The bridegroom finally comes. It's midnight. They don't have their oil. They're going to go try to find some. You can see the montage, right, of them like trying to knock on the doors. Nobody's opening. You could be laughing at them until this moment when the door is shut, right? It feels really harsh, doesn't it? If we read this as a parable, not an allegory, one thing that stands out to me is the harshness of that moment of being caught outside, right? It comes out of nowhere. It surprises, it jolts us. That's exactly how parables work. The other thing that stands out is this idea of scarcity. Oh, we can't share oil with you or there won't be enough for everyone. Does that sound familiar? I don't know. Is that an argument we hear a lot in our country about who can share, when there will be enough? You know, those foolish bridesmaids really should have brought their own. It's their own fault. They didn't bring their own. Are we supposed to help them? What are they going to learn from that? Right? You can hear that in the story. But I wonder, why did the foolish bridesmaids not have extra oil? Could there have been real reasons? Besides, it makes for a funny story. Was it expensive? Did they lack the connections to male members of their household that they needed to purchase something? Are these same women even more vulnerable when they go out at midnight in the dark alone together? And then they aren't even welcomed. In fact, the bridegroom says he doesn't even know who they are. Who do we not know? Who do we not recognize, right? I don't know about it for you, but that slam of the door feels to me like our southern border. It feels like racial segregation. It feels like the family of someone who casts out their child because of their sexual orientation. We don't know who you are anymore. What if the opening words of this parable, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this"? What if the kingdom of heaven is that community that develops between the 5 bridesmaids who get locked out? Who didn't have enough oil, who are on their own in the dark without access to the party. When Matthew says, "Keep awake, therefore," in the last verse, the Greek everybody fell asleep, so it doesn't literally mean don't fall asleep, right? The Greek is something more like be vigilant, keep watch, pay attention, which does kind of make sense. And we think that maybe this is a story about paying attention lest we lock anybody outside our doors, lest we fail to recognize somebody who belongs at the party. Let's keep reading. The next parable is the parable of the talents. We talked last week that a talent, this does not mean like your special skill. Jesus is not talking about juggling or playing the flute. A talent is the name of a coin. It's a denomination of money, about 15 years' wages for a low-wage worker. So we use the Massachusetts minimum wage and calculated it to be like $515,000 in this one coin called a talent. We also last week called it a Benjamin instead, that maybe carried more of the weight of the meaning. Because we think this is a story about how we should all use our talents, right? How, like, I should pick up the flute that I played for 2 years when I was 12 and play it in church for Jesus. That is not what this story is about. If we read this as a parable, what gets provoked in us? Let's listen. For it is as if a man, going on a journey, summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 Benjamins, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. And then he went away. The one who had received the 5 went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more. In the same way, the one who had the 2 made 2 more. But the one who had received the 1 went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And then the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed me 2 talents. I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take talent from him and give it to the one with the 10. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. And as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing. What do we notice in the parable this time? The master trusts the slaves with his property, with huge sums of money. That's interesting, don't you think? He's going away and he's giving these people big parts of his estate to manage. Interesting. The power of fear, I think, is really prevalent. The slave with the 1 talent, obviously he had reasons to be afraid. He had seen the master act unjustly before. He knew he couldn't trust him. He was really afraid. And I think this happens to a lot of us all the time. There are reasons to really be afraid. We don't stand up for what's right at work sometimes because we're afraid. We don't want to lose our job or our income, right? Think of the women testifying against Harvey Weinstein, how long it took for that to come out. Because he had power, and they were afraid. They didn't have the same kind of power. Sometimes we don't stand up when someone else is being hurt because we're afraid that if we stand up, we might get lumped in with them, that we might get hurt in the same way, right? Just last week, I decided I would try making a little Facebook Live video about our Lent series so we could use it to kind of publicize. And this is who we are. We're a church with a rainbow on the outside. It's not a secret. And I thought for a second, wow, I'm making myself vulnerable if I'm going to say these words on a video coming out of my mouth on my Facebook page? What might happen? What kind of comments might we get back? Who might really not like this? I was afraid. For a little bit, but I was afraid. And when fear paralyzes us, this passage makes pretty clear, right? We're losing something. This part, to those who have more will be given, but if you have nothing, even that will be taken away. I feel like we see that happening all the time around us in terms of money, right? Like it takes money to make money. But what if it's not about money, but maybe about something like courage or risk even? A commentator I like to listen to in a podcast was saying, what if the slave with the 5 talents had gone and invested the money and lost a bunch of it? And he said, I would like to believe that the master would have the same reaction. That what he wanted was for these guys to go out and try something, to take action. When we take a risk, when we use courage, it's kind of like exercise, right? We're building muscle, and sometimes we find ourselves stronger for it. So I wonder, as we read this parable for our church, we have taken risks before. We do have courage, but what are the next risks coming? What is the next thing that we need to be courageous about? What are the risks that we're being asked to take that maybe seem too scary or too dangerous? So then we go to the sheep and the goats. Verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. So who has gathered here to be judged? What does it say in verse 32? Who is gathered? All the nations. When I read this parable, I often think of it as a personal story, as thinking about personal piety. One was the person I saw who was hungry and I didn't feed them. What if it's a collective story? What if it's a communal story? I don't know. Let's keep reading. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, Come, you that are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, or Sir, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Then he will say to those at his left hand, You that are accursed, depart from me into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer, Lord, Sir, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't take care of you? And he will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Last week we talked about the surprise that neither the sheep or the goats knew that they had done good or done bad until the end, right? So it's not like churches that have the Matthew 25 soup kitchen, the Matthew 25 clothes closet. They weren't those people. They didn't know if they had done this. They were truly surprised. And we would really like to be the sheep, right? We would like to have a Matthew 25 soup kitchen or clothes closet because we want to set ourselves up to be the best. When I read this story again after 2 weeks, the overarching theme that seems to stick out to me is one about division. So you have, of course, sheep and goats, the people who saw when the king was in need and helped him, and the people who didn't. But you have another division that's more insidious, that's carried on by the way that we like to name our ministries, Matthew 25. It's the division between the people who need and the people who are going to help, right? I wonder what kind of divisions we perpetuate by calling ourselves the sheep, by trying to be the good ones, the people who give help. Could it be that the goats didn't see the king and help him out in those situations of hunger and thirst and nakedness and sickness and imprisonment because they were doing their absolute best to stay away from those things, from those needs? Could it be that the sheep saw the king and helped him because he was their neighbor who didn't have enough food, because he was their father who was in prison, because he was their child who was sick, he was their classmate who needed a better winter coat? Could it be that maybe the sheep didn't see themselves as do-gooders on behalf of the needy because they were just involved in a community? They were among the people who were the least. You know, not one of us is impervious to need. Some of us have more money than others, but not one of us is ever going to live a life where we never need anything. It's not going to happen. We're all going to need something sometime. But some of us try harder than others to pretend that we can do it alone. And maybe that's where the goats fell short. Maybe they missed out on the people around them who could have used their help because they couldn't even look at their own needs. How can we see what anyone else needs if we can't even acknowledge what we need, right? To me, the sum of these three stories, when we really read them with fresh eyes and with really open hearts, is that we are invited into some really exciting work now. You know, the first year that we did our special Lent series in 2017, we used this diagram of the center and the borderlands. Remember that? We talked about how society is kind of constructed to privilege some people over others. And we talked about who Jesus would align himself with. Remember that time you read the Bible? I think it was this passage, wasn't it? And we had put the sick and the poor and the thirsty and all on the outside, all on the borderlands. And we said, where would Jesus be? With them, right? And it was so clear to us who Jesus would say he was with that we put a rainbow on the sign in front of our church. Because we wanted to be clear about who we were with also. We started to ask ourselves how we could stand with people who've been shut out of the party, people who had good reason to be afraid, people who had been discounted as simply people who need help. We welcomed the Shekinah congregation, do you remember? We sold our church's manse property to immigrants, and that process took an exceedingly long time, longer than it needed to because of language barriers, because of things like who gets access to mortgages. But we committed to it, and we stayed watchful for those who have been told that they don't belong. We went to stand with them. That is the same spirit that we're being called to embrace becoming a Matthew 25 church, and we'll talk about that in a minute after the sermon. And it's also what we're going to do this Lent in our study on gender and sexuality. It's what we've committed to in the next 3 years as we think about our mission identity and how to support our community. Instead of being terrified about how we're ever going to live up to the standard that will get us into heaven after God's terminal pop quiz, I don't know about you, but I feel energized by these stories to try to think about who we are, about what we really value, and about how we will choose to live now for the sake not of our own future security, but for the full flourishing of all the life around us. As Tanya read this morning in Deuteronomy, God says, I have set before you the paths of life and death. Choose life, that you may live